Here is the correspondence by email between Anne Dixon and Sean Linton. Sean Linton is entitled in his email as the Senior Patient Safety Correspondent at the Health Service Journal, so a journalist. He's on Twitter at Sean Linton. Here's Anne's desperate letter to him, Monday, 17 September 2018 at 17:40. Dear Sean, do you think this investigation is going to report the truth, no matter how damning? The investigation team only have to say it was just how we interpreted it, or we let our emotions get in the way, or we don't understand, or it's just an opinion. How can we trust? And what happens if they let us down? The litigation won't provide even the beginnings of the money for a legal team to get a new inquest and preparation for it and representation at it. If the report isn't honest, we will have nowhere else to go now. The legal department of NHS will withdraw the offer if we don't accept it before Friday. They won't acknowledge the truth in the apology they are presenting. It will barely cover the cost we had for the original inquest, which was just a cursory glance at the papers and a barrister coming to support us at a day inquest without solicitor and with very little understanding of the case. We just think it is all going to end up hushed up again. Dad is dying, and I feel we have not achieved bringing truth into the open or anything to prevent cover-ups happening time and again to other families, and we have not done anything to improve the safety of healthcare. I don't think we have done anything which was worth all the stress and sacrificing our lives for. What happens if nothing good comes from the report? What happens if there are only fragments of truth in it? They can't tell us what they're doing or thinking because it has to be independent. Waiting to see if we have met honesty and integrity at last is very difficult. We're trying so hard to trust and to have confidence that this will be different. Kind regards, Anne. And here is the reply from the journalist Sean Linton, with not even an acknowledgement of the imminent death of her father, very little acknowledgement of the desperation of this mother, writing, asking for help, making it clear that she's right at the end of what she can cope with. His reply comes through. Sean Linton to Anne Dixon, a reply again on the 18th of September 2018 at 15:42. Not a thoughtful reply, one could say. Not a compassionate reply. Hi, Anne. I can't imagine anyone more likely to deliver for you than Bill Kirkup. I'm sorry about the litigation. I can't really advise you. It's not my place. It seems unreasonable to withdraw the offer until the Kirkup inquiry is complete, in my view. Have you asked them to wait for that review to complete, as it may shed more light? I know it must be hard to sit there while Kirkup and his team do their job. You just need to tell yourself that nothing you can do will make a difference now. You've already done great work, and you just need to have some patience and let the investigation take its course. Best regards, Sean Linton, Senior Patient Safety Correspondent, Health Service Journal. Twitter at Sean Linton. Andrew Bridgen, I wanted you to meet Anne Dixon, and you already know Victoria Rixon. This is an interview that I think, Andrew, has the import and the gravity of the post office scandal. It is also a story that involves, as the post office scandal did when you were the one who broke it, it involves people who have not been listened to by any of the authorities. So I thank you very much, Andrew Bridgen, for joining us, and a very warm welcome to you, Anne. I want to begin with you, though, Victoria. Why did you bring me this story? Why did you come to me and say, Liz, this is possibly the most important story I have come across, and you've had many people reach out to you?
Yes, Anne jumped into my Facebook inbox, and I don't read a lot of my messages because there are so many. And you know, and I've told you, I struggle with the volume of people I can't help. But for some reason, I read Anne's message, and it was from her husband. Actually, it was in his name. Because
from
when
Graeme,
it went
from Graeme,
from
and
Graham,
I'll just say for people who aren't yet familiar with you, most are, but you have put yourself out there as a former midwife. You've now moved on from that career, but initially as a midwife whistleblower, talking about the grave discrepancies and faults in the NHS, in the British health system for women who are giving birth.
absolutely, yes, absolutely, Liz. So Graham sent me a message, but it was the way that the message came across. Something locked me into the wording and the things that were being said and the graciousness of what Graham was saying. And then I arranged a meeting and met with Anne. And I think you remember me telling you, Liz, that I needed 2 weeks to recover from what Anne had disclosed to me of the torture of her little girl. And I really struggled with that as a mother, as a woman, and as a midwife. And as time has gone on, piecing together this whole story has taken nearly 8 weeks.
That's extraordinary. There are many things I've read about this. There was a BBC article, a BBC piece in 2021 saying, headlined, Elizabeth Dixon, lessons not learned after baby death cover-up, says family. That was 2021. But I'm going to refer to begin to your notice of public outrage that you've put out, and I'm going to read the full notice underneath and put it underneath this interview. But you just begin with, in loving memory of Elizabeth Dixon, your baby, Anne.
Yes.
You talk about her in this way: a precious daughter whose life was stolen by negligence, by deception, and by cover-up. Her voice was silenced, but her truth will not be denied. It's a very moving statement, and for all mothers, not only in the UK but around the world, who are concerned at the way our mothers and babies are being treated now in hospitals at birth time. This is a really important interview, so please share this everywhere. So, Anne, there are many, many details and many facts and layers to this case, and I understand this has been going on in your life now for 25 years since your baby was born. You have, in effect, been trying to get the authorities to listen to you. Can you give us an overview of what happened with baby Elizabeth? When was she born and what happened subsequently?
She was born on Thursday evening, 14th of December. She'd been bouncing around inside me. The midwife had said I could go home if I wanted to, but I stayed for another trace when she was calmer. Unfortunately, that couldn't be done until later in the evening. So the midwife left me with the maternity unit, and a junior doctor misunderstood and thought there was a problem with my baby. And he insisted my baby was born early. I didn't believe there was a problem. I've had experts look at it, and my baby wasn't hypoxic. She wasn't anemic. If anything, if they were concerned, they should have carried on tracing and investigating. But the junior doctor rang my consultant, who ordered Elizabeth be born straight away. So I couldn't stop it. I tried to stop it. A consultant came in, on-call consultant, and he wouldn't listen to me. And he threatened me with court if I didn't agree.
This is back in 2000, isn't it?
Yeah,
So we'll call her baby Lizzie. We'll call her baby Lizzie. How was she when she was born? I'm sorry if this is still really painful, but you've been through 25 years of this. So how was your little one when she was born?
She had excellent scores at birth. She was crying, moving, temporarily ventilated, but she was doing so well. She fought the ventilator, but she had high blood pressure, which they picked up at birth. They had a care plan. They were meant to be checking it with cares, and they just didn't bother. They signed for doing it, but they never did it. And
how do you know that, Anne? How do you know that?
Because records I asked for after she was born, when she was a few months old, finally came to us 10 years later, and I could see what they hadn't done. And I realised that she'd suffered a massive brainstem injury at 4 days old, and it had been hidden from us. And she became completely disabled. She'd been crying this high-pitched cry. She'd been distressed because of pain in her head she had intracranial pressure in her head on the blood pressure, and she just stopped. She stopped moving. She stopped crying, and I never heard her cry again. And she was only 4 days old, and I never heard her cry again. But instead of owning up to what they did, they buried it. And they knew what they'd done. The records show they knew. And they seemed to have waited for her to die over Christmas, which, after what she went through, I wish she had done. But she was still there after Christmas.
Her spirit was extraordinary from what I've read, and she probably has her mother's spirit. So when she had that high-pitched crying, was she not with you? She was in intensive care at that stage?
She was in the special care baby unit because she was 2 months premature, and they just ignored it. I asked to see the obstetrician who'd ordered her delivery over the phone. She hadn't even looked at the heart traces. The on-call doctor didn't bother looking. He went with what she'd said over the phone. And she came to see me and she said my description of Elizabeth belied the truth. Everyone was telling me it was a miracle, that she'd been in danger, and they performed a miracle and I was ungrateful. But they hadn't. They got her out for no reason at all. There was absolutely no reason. And Martin Pittman, who's a whistleblower, looked at the traces, looked at all the paperwork, and he said she wasn't hypoxic, she wasn't anemic, and there was no reason to deliver her early. But they spent all this time just pretending they performed a miracle, and they didn't listen to me. They wanted her to be a miracle. So when I said something is wrong, they just didn't listen. And then she just became disabled, and we didn't witness it happening, so they swept it under the carpet. And she didn't die over Christmas. And then they sent her to Great Ormond Street. They knew she had her brain, her fontanelle part, soft part of her, in her skull was bulging from the pressure in her brain. They knew there was a problem with her blood pressure, but they didn't tell Great Ormond Street. They didn't send the medical records. Great Ormond Street never asked for them, even when they couldn't explain her disability. And so they treated her based on a summary that wasn't the truth. And we didn't know. So we didn't even know they had a summary. In Frimley Park, I was told, I needed to see a psychiatrist hours before she became disabled. And my obstetrician, unbeknown to me, was obsessed with, the psychiatry or psychology or whatever, pregnant mothers and new mothers. And when she went to Great Ormond Street, they didn't know she'd had high blood pressure since birth. And they brought her blood pressure down immediately, which is also dangerous. And I said, what's happened to her? She used to move, she used to cry. And they believed the summary they'd been sent. And they said I needed to see a psychiatrist again. And so they sent me to a children's psychiatrist. I was on antidepressants because apparently I was depressed. So they said, they just destroyed her because they didn't listen to me, and they didn't know what had happened at Frimley Park. They had no idea. We had no idea because we didn't witness it. And in Great Ormond Street, they found she had an infantile non-fatal neuroblastoma, which they could have identified in pregnancy, but they just ignored it on all the scans. And they said they weren't going to treat it, but they were unaware of the brain damage, and she kept holding her breath. So they decided they would treat it because they thought it was causing a problem with her breathing. And when that didn't stop the problem, they forced us into giving her a tracheotomy. They coerced us into signing it and said she needed a tracheotomy, but she didn't. She'd had a brain injury at 4 days old.
A tracheotomy, a tube down her little throat. She's still new.
And
can I just ask, at this stage, did you still have faith in the doctors to some extent when they were doing this gaslighting of you and saying you had the problem and yet your mother's instinct is going against their advice? Were you just confused?
No, I just desperately tried to protect her while she was there. I mean, years later, I discovered that Frimley Park staff were complaining because I asked questions and was expressing milk. And why was I bothering to express milk? And then in Great Ormond Street, they I stayed with her, all the time, but nobody would listen to me. And she ended up having this tracheotomy performed, and it didn't make any difference. And then she couldn't tell them anything. She couldn't move. And so they would just take shortcuts with her. I mean, they did a stomach biopsy without sedating her, and it failed, so they did it again. And Graeme had to witness it. And they wouldn't give her local anaesthetics like they did to the other newborns. Because she couldn't do anything, she couldn't react, they just took shortcuts quickly. And in June, we'd had enough. She'd been there 6 months. She looked profoundly disabled. She had a neurologist that said, we didn't know what we were talking about, and that she would be riding a tricycle at 3. They did 2 MRIs, but they don't appear to have looked at the brainstem. All they were interested in was research with her. She was signed up for research almost the moment she got through the doors.
Did you give permission for that? Did you give permission?
We did, because we wanted to help other children. But, if it could help other children. But 6 months old, we wrote to the chief executive and medical director, who was the same person, Jane Collins. Turns out she was a neurologist, and she'd actually worked in the neurology department, and she knew the people. And then she got an opinion from another opinion in neurology, who said my daughter was like a newborn. And then she got an independent opinion, and it wasn't. It was from a doctor she trained under at Guy's and St Thomas's. And he said she wasn't as developed as a newborn. They had MRIs. These people saw the MRIs, and the MRIs show that in the pressure in her brain, had pushed her brain down onto her brainstem, onto the part that deals with all the things like breathing and emotions and moving, temperature stability, everything. Sucking, because she couldn't suck, she had no grasp reflex. But they didn't tell us. And then they were furious because she'd been there 6 months, and they complained about how much it cost to keep her in the neonatal intensive care unit. And apparently it cost £2,000 a day. And so they just wanted to get rid of her from there. And when you have a tracheostomy, you're meant to have warmth and moisture, because it's meant to be maintained like your nose and your mouth maintains your breathing. And they took all that away from her, and they gave her 24 hours a day. They gave her compressed oxygen, which is freezing. And people started to raise concerns. We raised concerns, but they just seemed to want to get rid of her. And they also put her on, they prescribed 2 variants of morphine, just like that, out of the blue, when she hadn't been on it before, just because she was profoundly disabled. And one of them we didn't even know wasn't even licensed for a baby. And they dumped her on a general neurological ward, and it just got worse and worse. And when we tried to raise concerns, the registrar said we were just problem parents, nuisance parents.
For people listening to this, any mother who has been through an experience of birth where you are not listened to, and there will be so many who relate to aspects of this, but yours is at a level that I have never come across before. Andrew, the biggest thing here is a woman and her husband who are absolutely not being listened to by the health services in Britain at any level. It's horrific what Anne has gone through, Andrew, and she has pieced this together. We'll get back to that story in a moment, Anne. She's pieced this together in the last 25 years by herself going through the research and demanding records and never giving up, but being re-traumatized and re-traumatized. Does this sound anything like the post-office trauma scandal of people who weren't listened to in that scandal as well, Andrew, to you?
Oh, there's none so deaf as those who don't want to hear. Well, not only does it have echoes of the Post Office Horizon scandal for the cover-up and the institutional closing of ranks, but this sounds like many other horror stories I've heard from the NHS, and indeed it sounds to me very similar to what went on during the COVID-19 pandemic, something that the NHS has not owned up to yet. NICE guideline 163, the fact that the vaccines, so-called vaccines, the gene therapies were neither safe nor effective. And I think we're going to hear something about that in the next few weeks, hopefully from America. But what we know is that the NHS, unfortunately, the old adage is true, that they tend to bury their mistakes and bury them as deep as possible. I mean, the only way, when mistakes are made, we all make mistakes, but the only way we ever learn from them is by openness, transparency, and that is the very last instinct of our health service, unfortunately, from so many times. And of course, I'm involved in the coroner's inquest into the Derek Dimmock's death,
Yes.
relating to midazolam and morphine, and that's, even that will probably be dragged on. It'll be over a year of the inquest in 3 separate sittings, when the whole point of that inquest is to prevent future deaths, and that means it should have been expedited. And that was the original letter I wrote to get that inquest many years ago.
And as
but I'm fascinated to hear what hoops they've made the parents jump through to try and get to the truth and to hold anybody responsible for a catalogue of errors.
I was just going to say, we're going to hear in this story about Anne inquiry, and it's shocking as well. But Andrew, I don't think I'm speaking out of turn. And Vic told me just before we came on that Victoria said Anne is so expectant, Andrew, that people will let her down now after 25 years. I'm sorry I'm speaking on your behalf, but that broke my heart in itself. She is so used to people saying, I will help you, and then not helping her, not doing anything. So the fact we've turned up tonight just to listen, the fact that every viewer listens to this and shares Anne's story, I believe, Andrew, that in itself will begin to heal the heart of this absolutely broken-hearted woman who nevertheless continued to research the brutality meted out to her daughter, her little baby, and to her and to Graeme. I'm sorry to speak about you in the third person, Anne, but we are listening.
Well, no one can listen to Anne's memories of this very traumatic time without being moved by the emotion that's still there, obviously. And my eldest son was born in 2000. That could have been us.
Wow. It could have been any of us, Anne. Your story is a warning, and it is a cry for a far better honouring of mothers and babies. So please continue. So the baby was in this terrible cold state, having this treatment where it was just frankly brutal, uncaring, and the baby couldn't even cry now. And you are being traumatized, put on drugs, told you have a mental problem when you're a very powerful mother. What happened then?
She was, all these secretions were forming because they took away the humidification, they took away the warmth, and she was just receiving freezing cold oxygen 24 hours a day, and her tube was blocking all the time. They were constantly suctioning her day and night. It doesn't matter what time of night or day it was constant suctioning, and it was horrendous because she couldn't breathe when they suctioned her, and they were changing the tube all the time. She couldn't breathe and they changed the tube. And then I was raising concerns, Graeme was raising concerns. And then they decided they would discharge her, but she couldn't go to Frimley Park. So they arranged this lousy care package. They told us it was going to be safe. They told us the nurses were specially recruited. And we didn't even know that the plastic tube she had was completely dangerous when a patient's got these thick, tenacious secretions, because it just constantly blocked the tube. And when the tube blocks, she can't breathe. So they dumped her on a children's hospice, which was funded by the NHS. As soon as she got there, the hospice raised concerns with the community paediatric team, NHS paediatric team, about the amount of suctioning that was going on, the amount of tube changes that were happening, and nothing was done. And then they ran out of supplies for suction catheters. And they supplied suction catheters that didn't have any markers on them. So the hospice staff didn't know how far they suction, and they were constantly going too far and cutting Elizabeth's trachea all the time. It was bleeding all the time, coming up the tube all the time. And so I asked them if they could provide marked ones, and the community nursing team, and it's all recorded in their notes, said they couldn't justify the cost. No,
Couldn't justify the cost. Could not justify the cost.
Markers.
And so you tell me at any stage if you want to stop and just have some time, let me know. This is really traumatic, and the only reason for putting it out is the truth does set us free, but tell me if it is too much.
The inhumanity. So I had to take the emergency suction catheter from this pack that which had markers on as it came from Great Ormond Street, and I stuck it on a piece of paper behind Elizabeth, and I recorded how long her trachea tube was and asked people not to go further and put a note on it, and I've got pictures of Elizabeth with that in the background, and it's all covered up. The whole lot's covered up in that report, everything they did. My daughter didn't die because some nurse got confused or was a victim, because even in the hospice, unbeknown to us, they increased this morphine. They knew she wasn't terminally ill. They increased the morphine fourfold, including the one that wasn't licensed, and then they were providing a list of the drugs for the GP. And the GPs that the hospice used were working privately from them when they weren't in the NHS. And one of them, Ruby Palmer, she had to write a list out. She handwrote a list for our GP, but she considered the two morphines were the same drug. She got it all wrong. She got typed up. She then realised what she'd done, but she didn't alter it clearly. So it went to the GP as if it was the same drug being given at different times, but it wasn't. And so it was described as morphine sulfate solution. And the drug that wasn't licensed, the fast-acting drug, was put on the system twice. And then when the hospice asked for some of the other drug, which is called MST, they got sent the Oromorph, but in the dosage of the MST. And I didn't know. And they didn't know why they got the wrong one, but they should have known, because they got this great big bottle of this unlicensed drug. And then the hospice knew there weren't enough nurses. They knew they weren't all trained. They weren't all paediatric. They knew there was a first shift that was uncovered was the night Elizabeth died. That shift wasn't covered. And they still sent us home. And we went home with the drug that had been wrongly issued. And then it was left in the first nurse at home. She was addicted to morphine by then. She was a blooming junkie by then, the amount of morphine she had. And she was having 12.5 milligrams of this unlicensed drug for a child, which, an adult wouldn't have, but she got used to it, so she was addicted. The first night at home, a nurse noted that one of the bottles of Oromorph didn't have the right prescription on it. She told me in the morning, and I took it up to the GP, Dr. Michelle Sinclair, and she wouldn't alter it. She sent me around to the chemist, the Churchill chemist. They said they couldn't. And I came home, and in the afternoon I went back to her, and she gave me a new repeat prescription, by which time I now know she knew about the mistake. But she never came and altered the bottle. She never did a drug chart. Nurses wrote their own drug charts out. And then the day before she died, a health visitor came and had got a nurse to fill one out and took it away to get it signed by the GP. But my daughter died that night, and another nurse had written out a drug chart the previous night, and she'd written morphine sulfate, and she hadn't written MST. And she'd written the dosage of MST and just wrote morphine sulfate. And so the next night, this nurse turns up, first time, gave my daughter an overdose, 2:00 in the morning. And she didn't even recognise my daughter was suffocating at 4:00. Her notes clearly show my daughter's tube was blocking and she was suffocating. And a cover-up just started. I went to register the death. 2 days after she died, and we were told it had to be registered as a Surrey address because I'd phoned an ambulance because the nurse had brought her up, apparently dead in her arms. The tube was blocked. I phoned for an ambulance and she was taken to the hospital. But the doctor who'd been put in charge of safety of her and responsible medical officer, we never knew for 9 years that he was a police doctor responsible for child safety. And he was the doctor in the community and the hospital who'd phone the police if anything happened to a child, and he didn't. He just came into A&E and drove us home. And they covered it up in the report. He was designated doctor for child safety and he had been for years. And he should have phoned the police, but he just drove us home. And he was one of the doctors involved in the negligence after she was born.
What was his name? What was his name? Do you want to say his name?
Dr. Michael Tettenborn, who's destroyed my life. The police have covered up to protect him and his relationship with the coroner.
This Dr. Michael doing that to you. So once again, right through this system and beyond death, you are not being listened to, Anne. I just want to go back to when she died. The baby died in the early hours of the morning and you were not told straight away by this nurse who came to your house, were you? That part of your story, that alone is horrifying. What happened there?
Well, she clearly thought Elizabeth was asleep. And we had an honest expert witness who was ignored by the coroner and by Bill Kirkup. Didn't even contact him. And he said that massive dose would have probably suppressed Elizabeth's breathing anyway, to the point where she wasn't even able to try and breathe. So the nurse clearly thought she'd gone to sleep. But at 4 o'clock in the morning, she was suffocating in my house, below my head. And I'd been reassured that this nurse had years of experience. And she was over 50. How did I know? She'd only just qualified as a nurse. And the worst part was she didn't even need the money. She was a multi-property owner. She was obviously waiting 10 years so she could move to America. She had family in America. She was from Nigeria. And Bill Kirkup said if we spoke out about anything, I would be labelled a racist. You know, while he was doing this to us, I was at Black Lives Matter marches. I used to be a volunteer tutor to an immigrant, and I've done everything. All my life, I stood up for vulnerable people and people all around the world, collecting for Oxfam, going on, marches and things. And it's just horrific. And he threatened us the day before the report came out that we'd be labelled as racist.
Let's just cut here, Victoria, to what you sent me from Dr. Bill Kirkup. We'll get to his name in a moment. But here's a piece which I'm just going to read on screen, and he's talking about the importance of transparency. And this highlights for me the utter vacuousness of many of these people. They will give lip service to the principles and then do the absolute opposite. Let's have a look at Dr. Bill Kirkup's words. Here's a direct quote from Bill Kirkup in July of 2015. He says, when people conceal error or perpetrate cover-ups, when they fail to look and learn, when they keep on repeating the same mistakes and cause further harm, they break the unspoken contract. All of these things happened at Morecambe Bay many times over a period of years. Individuals, he says, must remain accountable for their side of that contract. And if we try to fudge this as entirely a systems failure, we will miss an important point. So, Bill Kirkup, a question for you. Have you concealed errors or perpetrated cover-ups? Or have you failed to look and learn? Have you kept on repeating the same mistakes and caused further harm? Have you, in fact, broken the unspoken contract of which you spoke in 2015? And here's a BBC piece from November 2020. It's entitled Home Videos Show Elizabeth Dixon, the baby, before her death. You can see these videos at the end of this piece. This is the paragraph. The death of a premature baby in 2001 led to a, quote, 20-year cover-up of mistakes by health workers, an independent inquiry has found. Elizabeth Dixon from Hampshire died due to a blocked breathing tube shortly before her first birthday. And I just put in brackets there that we know that she died from a lot worse from this interview. However, back to the BBC. The government, which ordered the inquiry in 2017, said the mistakes in her care were shocking and harrowing. A report on the inquiry by Dr. Bill Kirkup said some of those involved had been persistently dishonest. This is from 2020. Bill Kirkup, again, a question for you. Have you been persistently dishonest about the Elizabeth Dixon death? You must live with that. You must ask yourself that question every day, and let that question haunt you into the depths of your soul. So, Anne, we haven't quite got to Dr. Bill Kirkup's part in this. Where did he come in, and how did matters evolve in the days after the death?
Well, after she died, nobody wanted to speak to us. We didn't scatter the ashes because we began to realise we were having a cover up. The notes had been taken from the house, and they've been. You can see how they've been rewritten. You can see the handwriting, the pen changes, everything. Number of words in the sentence changed. Anything which she or the nurse who'd been there the previous day could change, because they wrote on the piece of paper. It was all changed, and she vanished. The nurse, I never saw her again. We had to wait 2 months to get the notes, and then I phoned the coroner when I saw my daughter had been suffocating in my house since 4 a.m. I was just utterly distraught, but no one wanted to know. Everybody covered up, the health authority covered up, and the NMC, we couldn't understand why my husband made a complaint to them just to find out what had gone on. And they didn't take a witness statement for him. They didn't call him as a witness because his report said the truth. Anyone that knows anything about tracheostomies would have known my daughter tube was blocking at 4 a.m. and would have changed it, because the nurse described Elizabeth as restless and wheezy, which are the key things that happened because she was struggling to breathe. So they obviously covered up. They turned out to have solicitors that were solicitors for the Children's Hospice. And one of the partners in the professional standards was also farmed out to Hampshire Children's Social Services. I mean, everybody knows everything. The whole thing was a nightmare. So we went to the police, not knowing who Dr. Tettenborn was. We phoned the police in April 2005. They finally visited after 19 days, never told us about who Dr. Tettenborn was, never told us that there were staff from the Child Protection Unit involved. They never interviewed us. They never took witness statements from us. And they disappeared, came back 2 months later, and then disappeared again. We consented to them taking copies of records from different organisations, but the police got the originals without our consent, without a warrant, and apparently they've all been destroyed. The trachea tube, which I've been keeping, which was tested by the honest expert, the police claim they've lost. They claim they've lost all the evidence. They never used their major crime computer system. Dr. Tettenborn had worked in child safety, not just a child protection doctor, designated doctor for child safety for, I think, decades. And when I met the CEO of Frimley Park, he couldn't get his head around it. He said, whenever there's a concern about a child, he's the port of entry into the police. And they didn't know why he turned up in A&E, because he shouldn't have been there. He wasn't an on-call consultant. He was a paediatrician in the community, and they bought 4 shifts a month in the hospital. So he happened to do some shifts with Elizabeth in the hospital. So I basically gave my daughter back to one of the people that had helped get her brain damaged and cover it up. I put my daughter into the hands of that man, and he had no intention of her being safe. We were told at the inquest that he'd had no contact with anyone from 24th of October to the day Elizabeth died. He was getting emails warning him, and he was doing nothing about it. From other staff in the NHS, he wanted her dead, so he'd never find out about the brain injury. And it's cruel beyond cruel. She suffered. We were told by Great Orme Street she had some unknown genetic condition. They ruined our lives. They ruined what we wanted to be as parents. And when I found out the truth, I was absolutely devastated. But in between, when I found out who he was, which the NMC always knew by the looks, I found out in 2010, I tried to raise concerns, and a social worker came round, and then I was accused of child abuse because I had pictures of Elizabeth up in the house. And then I was accused of child abuse again, and my other child was put on a full-blown child protection plan, which went on for months. And I just, and they threatened to take her away from me. And all I wanted was, I just wanted to have the truth out and learning for Elizabeth, and I was finding it out and people were stopping me. So that I had to battle that. We got a solicitor, or so we thought, from the Basingstoke Children's Law Society. She never turned up, and when I rang up to say why she didn't come to the Child Protection Conference, they said they weren't going to support us. So I Googled, and she was the assistant coroner for Hampshire, and she worked in child protection. The coroner used to be a Children's Act lawyer too. They used to work together, and they would know who Dr. Tennant. The whole thing was a nightmare, but I was finding it out, too late after they did. And then she finally came off the child protection plan. But a nurse involved with covering up the day she died, who was a designated nurse for child safety, Sue Mitchell, she was put on this panel saying I was a child abuser. Police, the social worker Hannah Leet, she came to our house once and said, if you think I'm going to whistleblow, you can think again. She's now a manager in children's social services. And she was, the only way they could get off the child protection plan after terrifying me was by changing the designated nurse to a school nurse who voted I wasn't. And then they changed the chair because the chair had always said I was. They had to change the chair as well for the deciding vote so that my child would come off the child protection plan. And then I couldn't believe what was going on. And then my mother-in-law died and I'd abandoned her because I was breaking down. I was suicidal. I was going to lose my child. And so I hadn't been to see her lately. And she was in a home with dementia. And I quickly went to see her, and I was horrified by her state, and I raised concerns about her, and they didn't get a doctor out. And then she died. And then it was just awful. And then Graham's taxi driver committed suicide, and the police investigated, but they never came to Graham, and he was the last fare the taxi driver had, and we knew police didn't want to come near us. And then I found where DC Neil Cousin had been transferred to, along with other police officers. They'd been moved to Thames Valley Police. I managed to find him, and I phoned him up and asked him to help us. And the next thing I knew, I had the police on the doorstep, and I was arrested.
Oh, Anne.
In front of my child. They hadn't even got childcare for her. They'd arrested me and hadn't even thought about her safety, my other little girl. And then I was held under arrest for nearly 12 hours. I wasn't allowed to make a call at the police station at all to see if she was okay. And I'm 9 years old, just 9 years old. And it was just a nightmare. The whole thing was a nightmare. Everybody helps each other. I had this duty solicitor called Chris Berry, and he said, the police have admitted you haven't done what they've arrested you for. My advice is to be interviewed by them. And I said, shouldn't you be getting me out here? And he said, well, I'm advising you to answer their questions. So I had to answer. I was interviewed under caution. My fingerprints were taken. And then he cleared off and left me. They left me at the police station. I finally did get out 2.5 hours later. I did survive. I thought I was going to die in there because they'd emptied the police station, Basingstoke police station. There were no other people detained there. And it was just me. And I thought they could kill me and they could cover it up. And nobody would know. And I was terrified. I wasn't going to get out alive to see my daughter. And I mean, what people might say, well, why didn't you just give up? Why didn't you shut up? But I'm a person of integrity. I'm a person of honesty. I'm a person who cares. I'm a person that wants things to be better, no matter where it is in the world. And why would you let me get away with that? They destroyed my life. They destroyed my dreams. I only had my other child by just pure luck. Before Elizabeth died, I was euphoric about leaving Great Ormsted. I thought I was going somewhere safer. So I just found out I was pregnant with her when Elizabeth was killed. And I just couldn't understand. So I finally met the CEO of Frimley Park, and he wrote to Surrey Police, who ignored him. Frimley Park had done an internal review with one of the doctors who'd been negligent, and he lied. And of course they lied, and I found out he'd done it, and that he'd lied. The palace manager reported him. Nothing happened. He carried on working. in charge of the neonates. Dr. Tettenborn carried on at the inquest. Dr. Tettenborn, the coroner, said he was retired. He wasn't retired. He'd becoming from the community to be clinical director of paediatrics at the hospital. He was no longer designated doctor for, Surrey and Hampshire Borders Trust or North Hampshire PCT or whatever. He now had this new role of designated doctor for unexpected children's deaths. They split the role in half and they trialled it in Hampshire. So he became the lead designated doctor for unexpected children's deaths for Hampshire and Isle of Wight. There were police on the team, the coroners on the committee. They just let him carry on. They just didn't give a shit about my daughter, and they were guaranteed they were going to keep it all covered up. Why would you keep someone like that in the role? Why would you say to him, you need to retire? He carried on working with the police, with the coroner. He carried on working, and then he carried on working for doing that role for the British Forces post overseas in Germany, I discovered. He was still doing that even when he retired from the other roles. And the coroner had sat in the inquest and they joked about him being retired and what he was doing in his retirement. He wasn't retired and the coroner knew he wasn't.
Did you, in all of this time, Anne, did you have one person apart from Graeme, your husband, on your side? Did you have one person in this whole system who listened to you?
No.
Just one?
No, because even after the police came to visit us in April 2005, our niece, she joined Hampshire Police and she didn't speak up. But she found out in 2010 that the police were stopping all their staff from having any communication with us. But she didn't tell us, she told her mother. And then I was trying to complain to professional standards and my emails bounced back. And they wouldn't take my complaint. I mean, this is about children's lives. This is about disabled children suffering with cold air, plastic tubes, suction catheters without marks on, suffocating to death in a house in Hampshire.
And drug overdoses, morphine overdoses.
That GP just didn't bother to change it. She just didn't bother. She just couldn't be bothered. She didn't do a drug trial.
Anne, I have no idea how you've kept going, how you've kept investigating through all these years. You kept what? You kept doing you kept doing Official Information Act requests, or you kept looking for reports. What were you doing in these years? You were still digging. You were digging into the case.
I had a lot of support from a children's hospital in America, and I went to see Andrew Morris at the Trinity Park. That took 3 years. The time I went to see him, wanted to see him, it was because who Dr. Tettenborn was. By the time I actually saw Andrew Morris, I knew that my daughter had this brain injury and that I discovered that she was, what had happened to her, and it was massive. And I thought he'd help us. The PELS manager, she did care, but what could she do, really? She was lovely, though, but she couldn't do anything. And then I went to the CQC and they just mocked me. And then I found out what they'd been doing. So then they apologised over the phone and they said they'd help do an investigation. There was never going to be an investigation, not of the truth. Behind our backs, they appointed Peter Hutton and Tony Felton. And Peter Hutton was the ex-medical director of the care company that was doing the care package for the NHS. And so they pulled the investigation without telling us why. And then the PHSO got involved because someone tweeted them and then found us and told us. And the PHSO put everything in a scope and then said, well, we can't investigate because so much of it's criminal. There won't be very much we can look at. So they then pulled out and then...
And yet I just want to cut in there, the police were not following up on taking any criminal action, which is the police role. Yeah. I'm just going to give you a moment. This is so intense. Andrew, so we have a case here where nobody in the system is helping, and beyond that, they're going out of their way, it seems to me, to break this mother, to break her spirit, a mother who's already lost her baby. In your 14 years in Parliament, and God knows we need you in Parliament in the UK, Andrew Bridgen. Have you heard of any other cases, any other people who've come to you with cases as serious as this so far, and there's more to come, in terms of cover-up and, frankly, corruption?
Well, a cover-up in Anne's case, or Anne's daughter's case, appears it's like an onion. You peel back one layer and there's another layer of cover-up underneath. No, I don't think I have. Obviously, I heard many distressing cases of medical negligence or neglect, and I'm aware of the atmosphere in the NHS for cover-ups, and also how they treat whistleblowers. It was notorious. I think for me, it's seeing Anne recalling how, through her own personal circumstances and trauma, she lost her confidence in the institutions that we always thought were there to protect and to get to the truth. And she was let down by the NHS, the police, the coroner's service, the judiciary. Also, what struck me as well is the analogy with someone who brings accusations or concerns that people don't want to hear in the NHS, and they refer you for psychiatric treatment. Isn't that what they did to thousands and thousands of people who reported that they were vaccine harmed? Yes. They were referred for psychiatric treatment instead of being taken seriously, because that's the way out. And also, for anyone to say that a baby born in this country, that we don't have the money to look after them, when we have governments that waste money on so many areas, and we all know what those areas are, often sending the money abroad for various projects, or indulging people who have no right to be in this country at huge expense. And when they can turn around and say that we do not have money to look after one of the most vulnerable members of our own society. It's unbelievable. It's deeply moving. And I just want to know, I'd like to hear now, if possible, where Anne's got to with the inquiries. And have you ever been to your MP?
Our MP, got a copy of the report. He was a Conservative MP. He never met us.
Who was your MP? Who was your MP? Can you remember?
I can't remember his name now.
That's how insignificant his input was.
It'll come back to me. But in 2015, he was replaced by another Conservative MP who I saw in town before he was elected, and he said he'd meet us. Ranil Jayawadena, he gave us 7 minutes.
Ranil Jayawadena, yes.
Well, yeah, he gave us 7 minutes of his time in September, I think it was 2015. The first one, James Arbuthnot was in there when Elizabeth was alive and died. He never even met us. And then you're absolutely helpless. And they just lie all the time, because then Jeremy Hunt tweeted, and a journalist, Sean Linton, knew, Jeremy Hunt tweeted that he'd appointed this Pete Houghton to do an investigation in 2015. Well, what nobody told us was that he was the one that was going to do the pooled one with his business partner in 2014. But we got this transparency document from Mike Durkin's office, who was NHS Improvement Director, Patient Safety, which was a transparency document and an email which came via his office, but from Peter Houghton, saying they were getting every little possible conflict of interest. And in it, he said he once went to a meeting with the former managing director of Primecare, Angela Single, and he went to medical school with the chief executive of Great Ormond Street. But he forgot to mention that his business partner was the ex-medical director of Primecare, and they'd both been put in previously and it being pulled because the medical director said, I can't do it. So
I need to say here, Primecare it was, for whom the Nigerian nurse worked at that night.
No, she didn't. She was an agency nurse.
Oh, she was an
agency nurse. And that's another lie. She was an agency nurse with BNA, and Primecare was a concept to use all these agency nurses they had. She was a newly qualified adult nurse who had no need to earn any money. I've got nothing against people working in this country, but she was committing fraud. She had a false referee. I proved it all. She pretended she'd been a student at Bradford College before going to do nursing. I'd got the University of Coventry on board. They still had her application, and it's all been buried by this investigation by Bill Kirkhart. He said it was irrelevant. But if you use false references, if you've not got a work permit on the agency work and you're working therefore without insurance, you kill a child. it all should matter. I've got nothing, against that side. It's about honesty. It's about integrity. It's about following the law.
It's about accountability. It's about accountability. This woman is extraordinary, Andrew. The research that you have done, Anne, the research in these years just blows me away.
Well,
and you're doing it.
I had some help, like the land registry. The ignorance of the NMC, they accidentally gave me a copy of her application form, and it had an address in it, Jasmine Court in Coventry. No, it had Sewell Highway in Coventry, where she lived. But they'd also been sending us non-blind copies. There should have been blind copies of letters they sent her, and that had Jasmine Court on it. So the land registry confirmed she owned both the properties at the same time, and then BT helped us with the old phone book, and she had a property in Bradford too, and that's what we know about, all at the same time, whilst training to be a nurse at the age of 50, and qualifying just before she was 50. She was almost 50, And why did she come to our house? She had a job in the NHS. She had Montine properties. She came from one of the wealthiest families in Nigeria. I mean, her brother went to boarding school down near Cheltenham. I don't know where she went to school. Why did she come to our house? She was a qualified French teacher. Why did she need to earn that money that night? I didn't even get to say goodbye to my child. I don't know what my daughter, if she could think what she was thinking, because I wasn't there. I mean, she was literally dead in my own house. I've had to continue to live there because we were wanting the truth to come out, or find the truth and get some peace and move. And I haven't been able to move. I'm still stuck there. And so anyway, Peter Hutton stood down because we forced him to tell us the truth, because he hadn't been honest at all. He hadn't been transparent. It was all designed to make us think he was. And then the journalist, Sean Linton, was furious with me because he'd already done an article that Peter Hutton, who was a medical advisor to Miss Staffs, was now doing this baby's investigation. And then
for whom was Sean a journalist? For which outfit? Can you remember?
Outfit is exactly the word. He was Health Service Journal. Somebody contacted him, Health Service Journal, which really is just... It's just another arm of whichever government's in, as far as I can see. Somebody contacted him in 2013. He contacted the CQC about an offensive, libelous briefing they deliberately sent us, I think. And then he never did an article. And so we were just left vulnerable. And a year later, when he found out we weren't getting an investigation with the CQC, he did a story, but he didn't do any investigating, and he bashed Simon Stevens of NHS England. And 2015, he was getting copied into emails. He knew what was happening before we did. He knew we were going to get a letter from Jeremy Hunt when Bill Kirkup was appointed. He wrote to me and said, "Can I see it?" Well, he asked me, and he said that letter's dynamite. The investigation is going to be good. He was copied into Peter Hutton's, who'd written to me and said, how would you feel if just 70%'s in the report when I finished, when he came back on board? Then Peter Hutton vanished, and then Sean Linton said he'd been tipped off we were obstructing his investigation. We were doing nothing of the sort. We were waiting for it to start. And
so just that point about how would you feel if 70% was exposed? They offered you that. They negotiated 70% of the story.
Well,
is that what you meant by that?
But Mike Durkin and Peter Hutton vanished, claiming that I'd been obstructive, telling the Department of Health.
But can I just clarify, Anne, was the 70% saying they were willing to put out 70% of the truth?
Yeah.
That is such a confession of guilt.
Liz, can I just say that everything Anne has said, she has evidence to back everything up.
Anyway, he vanished.
Everything in writing.
Or other sources.
Before you keep going, Anne, I'm going to read out a letter you've sent to Sean, but I'll read that out and we'll put that below this interview as well so people can see the quality of your correspondence. What was that? I think the sound is covered up. Sorry.
I said, I'm sorry if Sean Linton gets to hear this and it's upset, but you don't go out giving a lecture to the Centre for Investigative Journalism 16 months before Bill Kirkup's reports comes out, boasting that you're proud about what you've done for the Dixon family, with a picture of my daughter behind you, which I own the rights to, taken by a photographer on our wedding anniversary in Great Ormond Street, and you don't even ask our permission, and you boast. And 16 months later, I'm suicidal with a total cover-up. And that's what I discovered. He'd done that after the report was published. But he found out that now Bill Kirkup had been appointed, and he asked to see the letter. We got a letter from Jeremy Hunt. In 2015, we heard nothing from Jeremy Hunt, but he tweeted that Peter Hutton had been appointed. This time round, we got a letter, and Sean Linton said it was dynamite, meant the investigation was going to be good. And then we met Bill Kirkup, and he said he wouldn't have been appointed by Jeremy Hunt if he hadn't wanted the maximum exposed. The letter from Jeremy Hunt reassured us of integrity, and where there was criminality, it would be reported, and they were determined to get to the bottom and learn all the lessons. And then Bill Kirkup said, I understand from Sean Linton you got a letter from Jeremy Hunt. And then he admitted he was involved in the drafting of it, and said, can I see what you got as the final letter? So the man who's going to do the investigation, independent investigation, was involved in drafting a letter signed by Jeremy Hunt's Department of Health that Sean Linton said was dynamite and knew about before we did. Anyway, Bill Kirkup said he wouldn't sweep the truth under the carpet. He said that he was going to do a hard-hitting report, and people would have to sit up and listen. They'd have to take action. And he said, I'm good at doing this, so it won't be 50-50 in the report. He said, when you come to see it, will you remember this conversation? He said, about 90% will be in the report. And he said, can we have a deal on it? In our house where our daughter died, he said, can we have a deal on it? And I said, yes, providing the 10% isn't everything touching on criminality. To which he replied, it would be 10% then. And the whole lot is covered up. Everything's covered up. The man has even changed the day of the week my daughter's born to cover up negligence.
Sorry, I need to go over that. So you said I'll agree to 90% being reported of what happened, as long as the last 10% that's excluded does not include anything pointing to criminality. And he said what? Just tell us again.
I said, providing the 10% isn't obviously everything touching on criminality. And he said, well, it wouldn't be 10% then, would it?
And what do you take that he meant by that? What do you take that he meant by that?
That there's more than 10% that's criminal. But he's covered the whole lot up.
He's covered the whole lot up.
He wanted all our evidence. I only ever had 2 meetings with him, but in the report he said he had lots of meetings and extended meetings with his expert panel. I met them once. He told us he wanted all our evidence, which we gave. They scanned it all at our house. He had all the evidence, and he then said, when I met him the second time, we were told we were going to have an evidence session. We were sent an email. Then we were told we couldn't have an evidence session. We could only talk about how we felt. But we went to London armed with 5 points, and he stopped us and he said, this is independent. It won't be independent if you give evidence. And he stopped us giving evidence. So we were never interviewed by the police, never statemented by the police. And Bill Kirkup kept us out of his investigation. Yet other families get to see draft reports, get to see people being cross-examined, get to give evidence, get film, get summaries of the evidence sent to them. He was doing East Kent maternity at the same time. Families were treated completely differently. And he just came up with this, well, when the report comes out, because you won't be involved in it, people won't be able to say, well, you're only stating that because the Dixons were involved. The reason why he didn't want formal evidence for us, which would be transcribed and then given back to us, because we'd have told the truth, and it would be the different to what is in the report. When a man changes the day your daughter's born from Thursday night to Friday night to cover up the fact they never did an ultrasound of her abdomen, is unforgivable. When a man claims that the mother says there's this heart trace and they've got no evidence of it, and the originals are still at Frinley Park, and they scanned everything at my house. We were so scared they'd cover up that they asked us every time they came to upload everything to an external disk drive, and we kept a copy of everything they'd scanned. So we got to the second, what they scanned and when. They just wanted to know everything we had so they could cover up. Sean Linton had previously been asked by the Department of Health what he knew about Elizabeth, and he said he'd never been asked before, and I guess they wanted to know what he wasn't prepared to out. Basically, he never outed anything. Never outed anything. She wasn't a regulatory gap baby. She was a baby who'd been abused, neglected, gross negligence committed against her. She'd suffered procedures and life she didn't have to have, even with the brain injury, if someone had told the truth about it. And then she was suffocated to death and overdosed in my house. And then the whole lot was covered up by a doctor involved in the negligence at the beginning. He was in charge of child safety. He hot-footed to the hospital. When I met the CEO at Finney Park, house manager, neither of them could understand why he'd come in, and they wouldn't have expected him to. In the report, Bill Kirkup's written he was on call that night. He's a community paediatrician. He drove us home. We started to raise concerns, and no one listened. We came back to the house a couple of days later, and all the records had gone. Everything had gone, but the thing is, you're still trusting because you don't know what it is they've already covered up. We were trusting. I mean, I grew up honest person. I grew up, my mother taught me values. I mean, in the community, I went out volunteering with her, even as a little girl. When I was a teenager, I did the Christmas run on Christmas Day with my dad to elderly people to go and have a Christmas meal in Woking. As I say, I volunteered to teach English to a lady that came in on arranged marriage, a lovely lady. I got involved with everything. And I was down on one knee for Black Lives Matter while he was getting ready to deliver this cover-up in Parliament. And I didn't even know why it was going to Parliament. He chuckled down the phone, they must think it's important. It's because it's a pack of lies and it got parliamentary privilege before we ever got the truth out.
I want to cover that point under Article 9 of the Bill of Rights, 1689. It is, this Dr. Kirkup is protected, isn't he?
Yeah.
It's incredible, Andrew.
Is a pack of lies. He's made a mockery out of me. He set us up to be declared racist. He's what else is he? He's just lied. He said there's no evidence of the CTG I'm talking about. They put it on their own external disk drive. The originals were at Finney Park. A lawyer from Finney Park's admitted they've still got them. The whole thing is we were set up, and towards the end, I wrote to him and said I didn't believe the truth was going to come out, and he wanted this media coverage. He even offered us their PR person without charge. He texted me, "We won't charge you for it." He said he wanted to go around the world because he wanted a pack of lies to go around the world before he ever got to say the truth. I love my daughter. He used to bang on all the time about his daughter and his second home and trying to make us send a picture of his dog. He was basically grooming us to trust him. I only ever had 2 meetings with that man. I wish he'd never set foot in my home. I wish I'd never heard of him. Other people think he's marvellous. After he'd done ours, he did one for a boy got brain damage called Gethin in Swansea. And of course, it all got publicity. He took the draft report to the family. He was open and honest with them. I guess they had nothing to hide or nothing they needed to hide. So people think he's marvellous. That got publicised everywhere, so we'd see it. And he didn't care less. He didn't speak to us again. 8 months later, I managed to get in contact because I used someone else's phone. And he just put the phone down on me. I asked him.
He put the phone. This is Dr. Kirkup. This is Dr. Kirkup.
I asked him why he did this, and he said this cryptic thing. We've been through this, and then he said this call isn't going to end well. I'm completely honest, and put the phone down on me. It's the only time I've spoken to him.
Anne, I want you to use this time on screen, and I want you to pretend he is here, and I want you just to take a breath. And think what you would have said on that phone call had this man had the grace and dignity and humanity to offer an ear at long last. What would you say? And I want you to address him directly. Dr. Kirkup, this is for you. Say that. Say those words. No, the sound has gone. So just start again. I think you've got your hand over the microphone. Just something.
Dr. Kirkup, how would you feel if this was your daughter, Anna Elizabeth, who you used to bang on about all the time? How would you feel if you came into someone's house and told them you were saddened by the cover-up, you've seen it before, how institutions don't want to learn and just want to protect themselves. How would you feel if you put a family through that and the distress when they finally read the report after you've conned them to the line, got all the press celebrating it? How would you feel if you were Paul Collins' family? Paul Collins was an innocent man who was scapegoated right, left and centre by the NHS, Prime Care and the hospice. He'd actually applied for a job before our daughter died in a completely different company, and he was hounded. We only realised later when he contacted us, he was set up as a scapegoat. His marriage was destroyed, his career was destroyed. He was found dead 4 weeks after that report was published. How, he doesn't care less as long as he's got his second home. These people are corrupt. They're safe pair of hands. That's what they are. I have no idea how many deaths they've covered up. They let people have simple contained cases. They let them have the truth out. They let them get the publicity. They give them MBEs and OBEs. And people like us can, they just sweep us under the carpet. They destroy us. I want an investigation into the maternity unit at Frinley Park Hospital and into the paediatric unit, into safeguarding, or anything Dr. Tettenham's ever been involved in, any police investigations, any investigations with social services, any NHS harm, because a lot of harm involves failings by the state. People are under their radar and they still get harmed or die. I want to know what he's been involved in that's been covered up. He crossed the Rubicon with my daughter, and I'm sure he's crossed it loads of times before and since. What a nerve to cover that up. Dr. Kirkup was given a privileged position. He's had a privileged education, and he's just used his fame and his position to cover up what happened to my blessed little girl. He never even wanted to see a photo of her. He didn't give a shit about my daughter or about learning or about patient safety. He was brought in to cover up. Donna Rockenden was warned by Rhiannon Davis that we feared a cover-up, that we hadn't been involved, hadn't had a voice. When the report came out, she tried to get me some mental health support, and I got a message back that he said, Kirkup said he'd done his tasking, and that was that. In other words, he'd done the cover-up. Rhiannon Davis, little girl, died at 6 hours old. She's had years of psychotherapy, all paid for by the state, private psychotherapy. And here we are, and I've been going through this trauma for decades. I deserve to know the truth about my little girl. They shouldn't, the way they abused her because they hid what they'd done at Frimley. I mean, I just think, and I can't ever have forgiveness from her. I can't ever say, sorry, I wasn't even with her when she died in my own house. And he came into my house, he groomed and conned us, he went away. I met him a year and a half later, and I was told I couldn't give evidence. I could only talk about how I felt. Well, this is how I feel, completely suicidal. Ordinary people have helped me. A man going to a mosque, realising I was agitated. I had petrol and a lighter in my car. I was desperate to go up to where Paul lived, just to sacrifice myself, even though I had another child. I felt so desperate. And he stopped me, and he got his sister bought an English copy of the Quran, and we went through it. Every page is full of good things for life. Another time I was heading up there again and my car broke down, and Jimmy, the AA man, realised that I was agitated, something was wrong, and he asked me, and he said, you've got to keep going, but you can't be doing it now, but you must keep going, you must keep alive, too much goes on. There was a Samaritan whose real name is Alison, and she said, I'm going to be waiting for that book to come out. I'm too traumatized to write that book. I just wanted other people to be safe. I had no idea what had gone on and what it was they didn't want out. I talked to Ted Baker, who used to be Chief Inspector of Hospitals, and he said, we've been a threat. He said, get yourself well and carry on fighting. It shouldn't be a fight, should it? This is public money. God knows how much they've wasted covering up. All the children could have been saved by different aspects of Elizabeth's death and the cruelty. I mean, why would you treat a disabled child like that? Why would you move the warmth from them, the humidification from them? Why would you do that? Why would you do that to my child? I can't understand the mentality of it. Why would you say you can't have suction casters with markers on and let people rip into my child every 15 minutes, blood coming up in the suction? Why would you do that to another human being? I can't understand it. My whole life had been about integrity, about love, about volunteering. Even while I was waiting things to happen, I was Well, it's my life. It's what how I was brought up. I mean, why did Bill Kirkcott take that money to do it? Graham says he just sees it as a job and he doesn't care less. For him, it doesn't matter whether he's, it's like an emperor. He gets the thumbs up or the thumbs down as to whether we can come the truth out. And after the report came out, I spoke to his head of secretariat, who was called Mary Newman. She used to work within the Department of Health. She was now a director in NHS Improvement during the investigation. And she said to me, well, he could write what he wanted in a public report. He had editorial choice and he chose to write what he chose to write and he had to think of public interest. And she said, there's a yawning gap between your expectations and what he did. She admitted what the GP
cynical. Did. How cynical. I want to ask Dr. Kirkup, if you would like to come on for an interview, please contact me, liz.gunn@freenz.org.
I say I'm lying.
No, I'm happy to prosecute what he says and to put that in the public domain. We are always fair here, and I'm certain that Andrew, I hope I can speak for you, we would be interested in talking to you with Anne here, and you can actually answer Anne and finally give her the hearing that she should have had a long time ago.
Like Mary Newman in there too. Yep. Mary Newman was the first Speak Up guardian for Guy's and St Thomas's. She handled complaints for Guy's and St Thomas's. The first Speak Up guardian, the woman that said, your expectations were too high. You wanted every little thing. Every little thing. He's written in the report, the nurse just got confused and he's laughed at us and said, there was a mistake by the GP spotted by the pharmacy. He said that there's no CTG. The baby was born on Friday night. There weren't enough staff to do an ultrasound because it was the weekend. You see, he just made a mockery of truth. He's basically he's taken my daughter from me because our daughter was everything the NHS did to her. We never had a life away from the NHS. That was our daughter. All the concerns I raised, I was raising concerns about warmth. I phoned people up to say there were GP was making mistakes with medications. Everybody knew in those days before she died. So, Dr. Tettenborn was warned about that she wasn't going to be safe, and he didn't want her alive. He didn't want us to ever find out what they'd done at Frimley.
And I really understand this, and it's so important that people see the trauma, but realize at the same time that with all of that trauma, you've had this other side that is so utterly capable and certainly able still to raise your child. How old is your other child now?
My other child, well, I probably shouldn't say because I don't want to identify her too much, but she has been, she's every mother's dream all wrapped into one.
Is she, I'm just saying, is she an adult? Everything. Is she an adult now?
She is, and
that's important. It's important because I don't want them to come after you with any other excuses. So
she is an adult. I don't want to say too much about her, but I didn't proud whatever she did. I said you don't need to do A-levels, you don't need to go. All I ever said, always just used to say to her, love and be loved and be honest.
Yes.
I know that you're loved unconditionally, no matter what. But she went on. She's done everything. She's every mother's dream all wrapped into one child, and I'm so proud of her. Despite it, I wonder if he delayed 4 years actually publishing the report so that she would actually go to university. I don't know. I don't think he was even kind enough to do that.
Well, Anne, I'm just going to cut in here because that was important to say, so they don't come after you when a parent says they're feeling suicidal. They can misuse that admission if you have a child that's underage. But your child is an adult child now, and every human, I think, Andrew, listening to the horrors of this story, would at some point feel suicidal. It is.
Well, because Anne didn't get the justice and the transparency she was looking for in the investigation, she's never been able to have closure, and that's it. Left the trauma with quite. That's quite often what happens.
Yeah.
And I'd love to reassure both Anne, yourself, and Victoria that things are better now, but unfortunately, we all know they're not.
You're not. This story stands as what, Victoria? As we said at the beginning, you've had so many mothers who've had terrible experiences in the hospital reach out to you. Anne's story does stand head and shoulders for all the wrong reasons. It stands head and shoulders above all the other horrific stories I've heard as a journalist about birthing incompetence and, frankly, criminality in some cases. This truly falls into criminal and corruption, those categories. So, Victoria, what would you like to see when you've been talking to Anne all this time? What is it you'd love to see come from this interview and from Anne speaking out? What do you think she needs?
Well, firstly, I really want to highlight that Bill Kirkup, Donna Ockenden, Sean Linton, Martin Pittman are all still very prevalent in maternity services now.
That's horrifying.
They are highly regarded by a lot of people.
But Martin did tell us the truth.
Martin did, but I don't know Martin. But I'm just saying these names, when this interview goes out, these names are well known in the United Kingdom in maternity services. And when Anne started to talk to me about her story, I was knocked off my feet how many names I knew. That's what alarmed me to the case, because it's not like talking about Dr. Tettenborn, who is retired and I wouldn't know who he was. Whereas a lot of these people, Liz, Andrew, I wrote about Bill Kirkup in my essays at university. What a wonderful man he was in my essays. To actually strip back Anne's story, like I said, I couldn't even talk about it because it destroyed me.
Yeah.
So much. This is my profession. This is where I worked. This is what I endured. And the things that I witnessed, I have now come to realize is more common. And there are many people like Anne hiding behind their own front door who have lived a life of absolute suffering 24/7 and sometimes never find enjoyment in life. When they have a beautiful opportunity with their own children, it's like a life of suffering. When you yearn that motherly feeling of a lost child, which I've only ever lost in my womb, not in life, is painful enough, and I can't even imagine. And I think for Anne, I get emotional about it because I put myself in her shoes as if it was my child. And that's why it's been so hard, because the people she's talking about are the people who are stood on the internet tweeting about patient safety. And I feel sickened, Liz. I feel sickened that these people are now about to enter into an AMOS inquiry into the maternity services that has just been announced in the last week, that 14 hospitals, and Frimley Park is not on that.
And neither is Honiton. Neither is Honiton. When they were doing Morecambe Bay, there were how many mothers died?
Many mothers died.
Honiton in the East End of London. I was writing about that in 2015, saying, what about that? Why aren't people like Bill Kirkup looking into that? But Donna Ockenden, via Rhiannon Davis, says that he doesn't even skim the surface, really. But, she did know. She knew of my concerns. She spoke to me before the report came out. When the report came out, she just ignored me. I wrote to her, I wrote to Jeremy.
And I think my concern, Liz and Andrew, is no MP. Now, you all know how loud I've been. I have been loud. I have not stopped. I have been relentless. I have been burnt. I have been burnt at the stake, witch hunt.
You've been through your own witch hunt, your own abuse, as we all have, for speaking truth.
Exactly. Yeah. And I have turned up every day in my integrity, and I will not stay out of that lane. Now, what is alarming is no MP has ever responded to me. And I have used the words criminal negligence, manslaughter in emails to 637 MPs last year. No one picked this up. Now, it was almost like, oh, it's just midwifery and birth. When you hear Anne and Graeme's story, that is exactly what is going on, hidden for decades and decades. God knows how many other women will come out. But my worry here is, and this is what I want to say, I've got to the point eventually. What I want to say is the parents at the moment are trusting some of the same people that Anne is talking about to get justice for their children and their babies and their wives or mothers that might have died in childbirth. And if they go past the point of 3 years, they won't get justice. But they're trusting that these people are coercing them in under the guise of, I'll be your friend and I'll give you what you need for your loss or your dead child. And they just then are going to be Anne in 20 years' time.
I didn't even get any support. And they choose certain mothers and fathers who've got simple cases that they're willing to allow to come out. And then everyone, it's just learning.
what I'm saying is, for instance, a baby death might be that a baby died of sepsis or died in labour. We've learned from that. It was
yes,
very
it's straightforward.
And then there was an
tragic but simple. Yeah, but when the report came out, James Tipcombe, who knew the truth, he sat in my house with the CQC, but he didn't want to know the truth. He wrote an article for the British Medical Journal, in basically praising that report and Bill Kirkhope. And then he found out I was upset. He did it within days. He didn't even wait a week. And then he wrote to me and said, you've achieved so much. You've got a headline which says there's been a 20-year cover-up. How would he feel if everything's still covered up, but the report starts like that? That's why it's written like that. It's been a 20-year cover-up. People have been willfully dishonest, fabricated facts, and ignored others. And then Bill Kirkhope did exactly that. I mean, it's driven me crazy. I just want people to be safer. I want this country to be honest. I want NHS care where everyone gets, similar level and they don't get covers. Why should someone be allowed to get the truth out? Why should someone get years of NHS funded private health support, medical support, mental health support, whatever it's called? And me, I've been struggling all these years.
Because you were brave, Anne, because you were brave and you kept at it, which is so heroic. Vic, I'm going to give you the final words on what is needed here. But before we do, I'm going to ask if any other whistleblowers or anybody who was present at any of these circumstances Anne has talked about, if you want to write to me, if it's weighing on your conscience, please do, liz.gunn@freenz.org. But Vic, just back to you. My question was, what in your looking at this case as a midwife, as a trained person who's been in the system, what do you think the system needs because of this horrific story of Anne Dixon and her baby Lizzie?
Corruption and the people that are corrupt need to be removed from position. Public malfeasance in public office does not wash with me, does not stand with me. Now, James Tipcombe, I thought very highly of and had a lot of time for. And I wrote an article in his medical health patient safety. He's blocked me on Twitter for no reason very recently. Now, whether or not they know that Anne and I are talking, I don't know, but he has blocked me. And he is one of the people that you would go to for patient safety concerns. And he's in a position of power with Jeremy Hunt. And he has blocked a whistleblowing midwife who is probably the most vocal right now today. So my concern here is that this new maternity inquiry is just another place where they've taken the chess pieces and gone, you go to that hospital, you go to that hospital. People need to be asking who's just moved secretly in certain boards, board of directors, executive boards. Go and have a little nosy. Go and look at Yeovil, who's just gone into position. You start looking at these things, people are not realising what's going on behind the scenes. Now, people might look at BBC article and say 20-year cover-up, but you read the article, it doesn't reflect there was a 20-year cover-up. It's just a title. It's propaganda. So my argument, Liz, in all of this is you have to have an independent inquiry where there is nothing to do with the government. And you know this, Andrew, with the post office. No one has justice from that. I went to London. I went in and bid to go and watch one of the post office trials because I was so interested in it, because I've always had this interest in injustice. But no one in the post office scandal has had any justice whatsoever. And you know that. And it's not transparent. It's not fair. Everything should be transparent to the public,
open and
honest. And it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter that there is a criminal case in terms of you made those choices. And I'm going to say this to the people who have covered up in cases, in my case of defamation. There is a cover up. I know it, and I'm unearthing it. I know there's a cover up. And the people will have to stand account for what they have done. We can forgive, but you have to stand up and start putting your hands up and admitting where your downfall and your part in this is that you've played. And there will be forgiveness. But when you look at Anne and you look at 25 years, it was like Elizabeth died yesterday. Yeah. This pain and suffering.
It took me years to find out what they'd done. They covered it up so well. And I've just been conned all the way through. I didn't trust Bill Kirkhope as Sean Linton did. You know, he shouldn't be getting emails, copied into emails. You know, this shouldn't be happening. He didn't know things before we did. He hasn't actually exposed anything. He's destroyed my life. I wrote to him in August 2015 and asked him to, to basically leave us alone because he was just doing what the state wanted. It's not about him and his ego. This is about children's lives, adults' lives. It's about public money. It's about safety. It's about the future of safety. And I'm just totally broken.
So, Anne, you'd like a full investigation now, and with people who are not with their hands in each other's pockets. To finish up here, and I really salute you, Anne, what you have gone through. I think it would have broken me, and I'm pretty powerful. I don't know how you did it.
A statutory inquiry with us as official witnesses in Northern Ireland. Paul Frew has got an entire cross-party consensus for introducing, and he's doing as a private member's bill, introducing an individual statutory duty of candour in healthcare. An individual statutory duty of healthcare. Why can't they do that here? Because they want things like what happened to Elizabeth to be buried. We're a threat because we know the truth. We weren't a threat. We just wanted people to be safer.
You just wanted honesty. So let's see what the Dixons are asking for, and let's get behind and support them. Please share this everywhere you can. The Dixons are asking in this notice of public outrage in Section 5 for public disclosure and reform, including immediate publication of all evidence and reports on baby Elizabeth's death, full independent investigation into all implicated institutions and individuals, enforcement of whistleblower protections, establishment of a full statutory judicial inquiry with powers to compel evidence, and Graeme and Anne Dixon as official witnesses, the parents having been excluded from giving witness testimony both by the police and by the investigation that the Department of Health and NHS Improvement set up. Section 6. The Dixons also seek redress and protection, compensation and restorative justice for the Dixon family, witness protection for bereaved families and whistleblowers. Section 7. The Dixons seek reform measures, including mandatory accountability and whistleblower training, individual statutory duty to disclose wrongdoing, independent audits of governance and complaints handling. Section 8. The Dixons seek and very much deserve a public apology. A formal apology must be issued by all implicated bodies, NHS Trusts, NMC, GMC, CQC, Children's Social Services, Department of Health, NHS Improvement, and others. A formal apology acknowledging not just failures, but also the murder, cover-up, and blatant dishonesty around the death of baby Elizabeth. Section 9. The Dixons seek accountability and oversight, regular public reporting with enforceable timelines, oversight by international human rights and healthcare watchdogs.
We were set up by Bill Kirkup and Department of Health, by NHS Improvement, by Mike Durkin. We've been set up all the way through, and I was terrified he wouldn't report the truth, and he conned us right the way through the line. The press had gone before I even saw the report, and in the evening I texted him because he wouldn't answer the phone, and I said, "What have we been a part of? What have you done to us?
What have you done to us?" And I just salute you. I do not know how you've kept going through what you've had. I hope today you have felt heard, and I do want to give Andrew Bridgen the final word on this. Andrew, do you see parallels with the post office cover-up? The same desperation, the same torment that those people went through is what Anne has gone through. People not only not listening, but twisting everything about her and about what she's suffered. Well, do you see those parallels?
I do, and it's still a cover-up today. The public inquiry, which I forced Boris Johnson to authorise when he was Prime Minister, I was the instigator of uncovering
Yes.
the Post Office Horizon scandal. I was filled in to give my evidence to that public inquiry. I wrote to them every 6 months for 3 years, and they always assured me they were calling me. And in the end, the last letter came back and said, no, we don't require your evidence. That was never a full public inquiry, was it? I've seen the cover-ups in Parliament during the pandemic and the pandemic response. I know MPs who are still there now who knew exactly what was going on 3 years ago and told me that, but told me they'd never speak out. And I yearn for the duty of candour for every public sector employee. But all I see is the bars and the fences outside Parliament to separate our elected representatives from the people getting ever higher, and the security guards getting ever more numerous. They know what they've done, and they know what's coming. And we need a huge change, because, as Anne has found out, those institutions are not there to protect her and her child the way she expected. And it comes as a huge shock. We need to get back to public sector being public services, because what you're seeing is they're not serving the public at all. They will cover up and serve the people who work in those institutions.
I haven't run this past you, Andrew, but my feeling is what we need is Andrew Bridgen in a position of leadership in the UK in the next election. And I would say to every mother and father who wants a healthy family and a safe environment for those new babies to be born, Andrew is one of the few men absolutely willing to listen to this story and not dismiss it as a sort of women's issue or a sideline issue. This is a major issue for the UK. I believe it's a major issue across the West, and we need men in positions of influence like Andrew Bridgen in Parliament who will listen to the women and who will make sure that the birthing of our next generation is safe. So, Andrew, I salute you, but most of all, and Victoria, thank you for bringing me this really important story, but most of all, Anne, my just untold respect for you and Graeme, what you've gone through, and for continuing to be brave enough to say, I will go on and honour my daughter's life. Thank you, Anne. Thank you for what you're doing.
Thank you too. Thank you both.
Thank you. Very brave.
Very brave.
Really done. Some positive touch. She's really enjoying it. And she's quite warm. Yeah, that's what we'd like. Okay, sweet pea. She's very pretty. Talk about noble face.